Hey, so tonight I want to share something personal. Not something I've talked about much, not even with a lot of my closest friends. It's one of those stories you keep tucked away, like an old photograph with torn corners. You only pull it out when the silence feels safe enough, or when your heart needs someone to understand, even if they're just a voice on the other side of a screen. It started like any normal week, but it didn't end that way. It was a Wednesday. Not that the day of the week mattered, but I remember it because I had leftover spaghetti in the fridge, and I was deciding whether or not it was still edible. It was a quiet kind of afternoon, the kind that hums gently in the background of your life. Nothing remarkable. I'd come home from a shift at the library. The sky was pale with early spring light, and the house smelled faintly of laundry and lemon dish soap. That was the thing about my childhood home. It was so normal, so functional. We were never the shouting kind of family. We didn't break plates or slam doors. Instead, our silences were surgical. Quiet could be a weapon if used with enough precision. I just didn't understand that yet. I'd been carrying something for years, a truth that sat behind my ribs like a hidden bruise. It showed up in little ways. I watched certain scenes in movies a little too intently. How I avoided locker room conversations in school. How I flinched when my dad made a casual joke about those types. Back then, I didn't have the language. I just knew there was something about me I couldn't say out loud. Not in that house, not with them. Still, I thought I could manage it. I thought maybe I could wait until I moved out, got my own life, met someone in secret, and smiled politely through family dinners while hiding half of myself behind a wall of manners. But there's only so long you can pretend before it starts to feel like you're fading. Like the person everyone sees is just a well-trained ghost. That week, something shifted. It wasn't one big thing. It never is. It was the way my mum asked too casually if I'd thought about dating anyone nice, meaning a girl. It was my little sister scrolling through her phone and tossing off a remark about how gross two guys looked holding hands in a show. It was my dad watching the news and saying, "I don't care what people do, but I don't want it shoved in my face." Each comment felt like a pebble in my shoe. By Friday, I could barely breathe around them. I kept looking in the mirror and wondering if they could see if it was written across my forehead in some invisible ink. If they already knew but were waiting for me to confess, just so they could reject me properly. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed with the covers pulled up to my chin, my heart rattling in my chest like something trapped. The moonlight made everything in my room look colder, lonelier. I remembered a time when I loved that roomy shelves full of books, the glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck to the ceiling as a kid. I didn't know then it might be the last night I'd spend there. I kept thinking, what if I just said it? What if I stopped hiding? What if I could finally breathe? And then, what if they don't want me after? I don't remember falling asleep. I just remember waking up Saturday morning and knowing I couldn't keep swallowing the truth. It's strange. We talk about coming out, like it's a moment, like a line you cross. But it's more like a series of small choices that become a landslide. I didn't have a plan. I just couldn't not say it anymore. The morning passed in a blur. I helped my mum with groceries. I folded towels. I laughed at a bad joke my dad made about our neighbor's lawn. I waited for a crack to open. It happened at dinner. We were eating stir-fry. The conversation drifted towards someone my cousin had just married, a girl he met in church. My mum smiled and said something about good, wholesome families. I didn't mean to say it. Not right then. But I did. I think I'm gay. That's it. That's what I said. Nothing dramatic. No trembling voice. Just words. Simple, sharp, small. The fork paused halfway to my dad's mouth. My mum blinked. My sister's face froze. And then the silence. That awful, heavy silence that felt like it might crush me. No one said anything for what felt like minutes. I could hear the clock ticking in the next room. Then my mum cleared her throat. Don't say things just to shock people. My dad didn't look at me. He took another bite of food, slowly, like I hadn't said anything at all. "I'm not joking," I said. Still, nothing. That's when I felt it, that first rupture. Like something in the foundation of our family had cracked and I had been the one to swing the hammer. I lost my appetite. My hands were shaking. I excused myself and went to my room. And I sat there, for hours, waiting, hoping someone would knock, or ask me if I was okay, or say literally anything. But the hallway stayed dark. The silence kept on humming. That was the night I realized that speaking the truth doesn't always bring light. Sometimes it just reveals the shadows you've been living in. The next morning, I woke up with that thick, airless feeling in my chest, the kind that tells you something is broken but you're not allowed to talk about it. I stayed in bed longer than usual, watching the sunlight crawl across the ceiling like it was trying to escape too. I could hear the clatter of breakfast downstairs. Bacon, maybe. My mum humming faintly, my dad turning on the news. Like everything was normal. Like I hadn't set a match to the only version of home I'd ever known. When I finally came down, no one looked up. Not at first. Then my mom glanced at me briefly and said, "There's toast if you want some." Toast. That was it. No mention of last night. No follow-up. No questions. No kindness. I took a piece, though my stomach was a knot of wet rope, and sat at the corner of the table. No one met my eyes. That was the beginning of the silence. The real kind. Not just the usual stillness that passed for peace in our house, but the cold, hollow kind that makes your skin itch. Everything I said was met with short, clipped answers. My dad suddenly needed to run errands more. My mum spent more time in the garden. My sister stopped talking to me altogether. And yet, in public, we were still a family, smiling, matching outfits at church. My mum still introduced me as her oldest to the neighbors, her voice sugary and warm. She hugged me when others were watching. But inside those walls, I became invisible. Or worse offensive, I started to notice how often they forgot to tell me when dinner was ready. I'd come down and find the dishes already cleared. How my laundry stayed in the hamper, untouched. How the Wi-Fi password changed one day and no one gave it to me. It was subtle, designed to be deniable. If I had complained, they would have said I was being dramatic. And maybe I was. Maybe I was looking too hard for signs that they hated me now. But when your world starts shifting under your feet, you begin to question every look, every pause, every too long silence. There was this one moment, I don't know why it stuck with me so clearly. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I came home early from work because my shift got cut. I walked in the door and heard laughter from the living room. My mum, my sister, and my dad were watching a movie. One of those old comedies they all loved, the kind I used to watch with them. I stood there, just outside the room, waiting for someone to notice me, to say, "Come join us." No one did. I went upstairs and closed my door, sat on the floor, didn't cry, just sat there in this strange floating numbness, the kind that happens when your heart's already been bruised too much to bleed. Looking back, I wonder if that's when I really understood. They weren't just uncomfortable, they were choosing not to see me anymore. Before I came out, I used to think my family knew, that deep down they must have seen the signs, the way I avoided certain questions, the way I hesitated around girls, how I never brought anyone home. I figured they were just waiting for me to say it out loud. But I was wrong. They hadn't seen me. They'd built a version of me that fit their picture, their idea of a son, a sibling, a future father and husband. The moment I deviated from that, I wasn't just wrong, I was dangerous. It's a strange kind of grief, mourning people who are still alive, especially when they're in the next room. And every time I tried to fix it, to talk about it, to explain that I was still me, they changed the subject. It's just a phase. You'll understand when you're older. Don't label yourself the worst one. We raised you better than this. Better than what exactly? Better than to be honest? Better than to feel? Better than to want to love and be loved? I started spending more time away from home. Coffee shops, libraries, long walks around the neighborhood even when it rained. I told myself it was just temporary, that things would settle, that they'd come around. But the truth is, I was already being pushed out. It didn't happen in one dramatic moment. No suitcase at the door, no screaming match, just a slow freeze. One evening, I came home to find my bedroom door locked. My dad stood in the hallway, arms crossed. "I moved your things into the garage," he said without looking at me. That was it. No explanation, no argument. He walked away. I stood there, staring at the door I'd painted blue when I was 12. The stickers on the frame. The dent from when I tripped during a pillow fight with my sister. The memories behind it that now felt unreachable. I slept in the garage that night. The floor was cold. The air smelled like gasoline and dust. My boxes were stacked neatly in the corner, like they were just waiting to be driven away. I curled up in the back seat of my mum's old SUV, the leather stiff and cracked. I don't think I slept more than an hour. I remember staring out the garage window, the sky dimming from grey to black, and thinking, so this is how it ends. Not with a fight, but with a locked door, and no one noticing I wasn't inside anymore. 3 days later, I left. No shouting, no dramatic goodbye, just a quiet disappearance, like a breath fading into the wind. It happened on a Thursday. I remember because I still had my part-time shift at the library, and I didn't want to be late. I packed the rest of my things in silence while the house slept. A duffel bag of clothes, a small box of books, my phone charger, toothbrush. The photo of me and my mum at my high school graduation, I don't even know why I took that. Maybe I hoped it still meant something. The garage door creaked when I opened it, and I winced like a thief. I was stealing myself. I didn't leave a note. I didn't need to. They knew. The worst part wasn't the leaving. It was that no one tried to stop me. I walked to the bus stop with the morning mist clinging to my jacket, my breath sharp in the early chill. Every step felt like it echoed too loud on the sidewalk. I remember looking back once, hoping to see the porch light flick on, someone's silhouette at the window. Nothing. That day, I learned something I never wanted to know, that being honest could cost you everything. And yet, I still couldn't bring myself to regret saying it, because if I had to lie to keep their love, it wasn't love to begin with. I spent the next few nights sleeping wherever I could. First, at my friend Ava's house. Her parents were out of town. Then on a classmate's couch, a guy from my sociology class who didn't ask questions just handed me a blanket and said, "Crash here as long as you need." It should have felt freeing, but it didn't. There's a kind of weight that settles in your chest when you're technically safe, but completely unmoored. I kept looking around, wondering if I was imposing, if I smelled like anxiety, if my sadness was leaking into the room like cold air through a window crack. One night, I stayed at a bus terminal until dawn, pretending to wait for someone. I sat on a hard plastic bench with my bag as a pillow and counted every vending machine buzz like a clock ticking down to something I couldn't name. A janitor offered me half of his sandwich around 4 a.m. I still think about that kindness. These nights blurred together, each one stitched to the next with exhaustion, awkward gratitude, and quiet fear. I kept my phone on silent and unread. A few messages came in at first, my mum asking if I was okay, my sister sending a thumbs up emoji with no context, my dad saying nothing, then nothing. Radio silence. I got used to it, that silence, but it didn't mean it didn't hurt. At some point, I started sleeping at an old friend's place, Nico, someone I'd met at a youth writing workshop 2 summers before. He shared a cramped apartment with 2 roommates and a cat named Biscuit. The place smelled like incense and ramen and old textbooks. It was perfect. He gave me a sleeping bag, a corner of the living room, and the kind of understanding that didn't need to be spoken. Nico was queer too. He knew. He didn't ask me what happened. He just handed me a bowl of cereal and said, "We'll figure it out." I held on to that, "We'll figure it out," like a raft. During the days, I kept going to work. I smiled at patrons. I shelved books. I answered questions about card renewals and overdue fines. I laughed when someone made a joke. I pretended everything was normal. But inside, I was crumbling. There was a day I'll never forget. It was quiet in the library, mid-afternoon lull. I was reshelving books in the biography section when I found a copy of Coming Out Stories by LGBTQ+ authors. I picked it up, opened it at random, read 2 paragraphs, and then I started to cry. Right there, in the aisle between S and T, tears slipping down without permission, my fingers gripping the spine like it was the only thing keeping me upright. Not because the story was sad, but because it sounded like me. Because for the first time, I felt seen by something. Someone, a stranger's words on a page, knew more about my heart than my family ever had. I sat there for 20 minutes, holding that book like a lifeline, wishing I could walk it home and place it on the kitchen table. No explanations, just a quiet "this is me." But I knew it wouldn't matter. Not to them. That night, back at Nico's, I curled up under a borrowed blanket and stared at the ceiling. The overhead light flickered, soft and warm. Biscuit purred against my feet. And for a second, just a second, I felt a strange kind of peace. Not joy, not even relief, but the absence of fear. That was new. And it made me realize maybe surviving wasn't about being strong every day. Maybe it was just about finding moments when you could breathe. Moments when you didn't have to hide. Moments when the world stopped hurting, even for 5 minutes. That night, I whispered to the dog, "I'm still me." And the silence, for once, didn't feel cruel. It felt like a beginning. I didn't realize I was still holding on to hope until the day it finally shattered. Up until then, some part of me, small, stubborn, naive, believed they might come around. That maybe they just needed time. That maybe, after a few weeks, I'd get a text from my mum saying, "Come home, we miss you, let's talk." But the message never came. Instead, what I got was a voicemail. I was walking back from the corner store, clutching a paper bag with instant noodles, apples, and a dollar store toothbrush. The sun was setting behind the buildings, casting everything in a burnished gold that made even the cracked sidewalks look beautiful. Then my phone buzzed. One new voicemail. From my dad? I remember stopping right there on the sidewalk, heart pounding. I stepped out of the way, leaned against a fence, and listened. His voice was flat, not angry, not emotional, just cold. He said something like, "You've made your choice. Don't expect us to support it. Or you." And then, "You're not welcome back until you decide to be part of this family again." That line hit me like a punch in the chest. Part of this family? As if being honest about who I am had disqualified me from being their child. As if truth was betrayal. I don't remember walking back. I think I floated, numb and hollow. The bag in my hand felt like it weighed 100 pounds. My breath came too fast. I wanted to scream or cry or call someone, but I didn't know who. Instead, I went to Nico's, sat on the kitchen floor, and opened the apples. I took a bite and chewed slowly, like I was trying to remember how to be a person. He found me there, 20 minutes later. He didn't ask questions. He just sat down beside me and slid over a cup of water. "I'm done," I whispered. He looked at me. "Done hoping," I said. "Done waiting for them to care." That night, I deleted the voicemail. I didn't want to hear it again, but I remember every word. The next few days were strange. I wasn't crying constantly. I wasn't angry. I wasn't spiraling. I was just empty. There's a kind of grief that doesn't look like sadness. It looks like silence. Like not wanting to get dressed. Like forgetting to eat and then realizing you don't care. Like staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m. because your body's tired, but your mind won't stop showing you memories, like home videos gone sour. I kept thinking about the first time I told my mum I was scared of the dark. I was 5. She gave me a nightlight shaped like a turtle and told me I was safe. I kept wondering how that same woman could now be okay with me sleeping in borrowed corners of strangers' lives. Was it me who changed? Or had they always been this way and I just didn't want to see it? Some nights, I'd walk through the city with no real destination, just moving. Feet on pavement, breathing in cold air and hoping it would freeze the ache. I'd pass houses lit up for dinner families around tables. Laughter spilling through window sound. I'd feel like I was watching a world I used to belong to. One night, I saw a father and son playing catch in the park. I stopped walking, just stood there, watching the ball arc through the air, the boy's laugh echoing in the dusk. The father ruffled his hair. The boy beamed. I had to sit down, not because I was sad, but because that kind of love felt like a myth I used to believe in, like Santa Claus. And yet, deep down, I still wanted it. Not from them, maybe, but from someone. That was when the anger started. Not loud, shouting anger. Not fire and rage. No, this was quieter, sharper. The kind of anger that made me realize how many times I'd shrunk myself to be what they wanted. How often I'd silenced my own voice, bit my tongue, laughed when I didn't feel like laughing just to keep the peace. Peace built on pretending isn't peace. It's a cage. And I'd lived in that cage for too long. So one night, I took everything I owned still, just 2 bags, and I went to a shelter that Nico had helped me find. It wasn't permanent, it wasn't glamorous, but it was safe, and it was mine. They gave me a bed, a locker, a hot meal. I cried in the shower that first night, not because I was broken, but because I was free. Free from tiptoeing, free from trying to be enough, free from the hunger for love that came with conditions. That week, I started applying for scholarships. I met with a campus counselor. I made a list of goals, taped them to the wall above my bunk. Get housing, finish school, find a community, learn to love who I am. Every morning, I'd wake up, reread that list, and whisper, still here. Because some days, just surviving is a victory. I didn't expect to find meaning in the things I carried, but I did. It started one afternoon as I unpacked my bag for what felt like the 10th time in a month. I was sitting on the bunk bed in the shelter-bottom bunk, chipped frame, a thin mattress that creaked when I shifted. I had this need to organize, to touch every item, to remind myself that I still had something. My clothes were second-hand by now, donated or traded. None of them really mine, but tucked at the bottom of my bag was a faded t-shirt from high school. One I'd worn to a drama club performance. It still smelled like dust and stage lights. I held it to my face and closed my eyes. And I remembered. Not just the show, but how alive I felt under those lights. How my voice rang through the auditorium. How afterward, my mum had hugged me tightly and whispered, "You were amazing." And how, even back then, I'd wondered if she'd still say that if she knew the truth. I put the shirt aside and reached deeper. My journal was next. Soft cover, leather-bound, gifted by a teacher who once told me, "Write your truth before the world writes it for you." I flipped through the pagisome filled with longing, some with fear, some with half-written poems about boys I never dared name. I lingered on one entry. One day, I'll leave this place and find a world where I don't have to lie to be loved. I touched the ink with trembling fingers. That sentence wasn't just hope. It was prophecy. Then I found the photograph. Me and my mum. Graduation day. She had one arm around my shoulder, her smile bright, her other hand clutching a bouquet she'd bought for me. I looked awkward in the cap and gown, but my eyes were shining. We both looked proud. I stared at it for a long time, not because I missed her, but because I missed who I thought she was. There's a grief in realizing that the person you loved never truly saw you, that the image you held of them warm, open, safe was just a mirage painted over the silence. I could have thrown the photo away. I didn't. I slipped it into the front pocket of my journal. Not because I wanted to remember the Liebert, because it reminded me of the cost of pretending. I carried a bracelet, tow-woven from string, made by my little sister during a summer camp when she was 8. It was fraying now, barely holding together. I used to wear it under my sleeve, a quiet connection to the version of her who once adored me, the one who used to sneak into my room and ask me to braid her hair. She hadn't spoken to me since I left. I didn't know if she was angry, afraid, confused at just following the lead of our parents. But I still wore the bracelet, even when it itched, because some things you hold on to, even when they hurt. After organizing everything, I sat back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. So much had been taken from my room, my safety, my sense of belonging, but these few items, these fragments of a life I used to know, they reminded me that I existed. That I wasn't just a ghost drifting from couch to shelter to sidewalk. I was a person, a whole person. And these scraps were the breadcrumb trail back to myself. It's funny how the things you carry become symbols, not just of what you've lost, but of what you refuse to let go of. They anchor you, hold your history, remind you that even in the darkest moments, you still have roots. One night, I read a poem in my journal that I'd scribbled half asleep weeks earlier. It said, "I am not the absence of love. I am the silence waiting to be broken. I am the space where truth grows wild." I whispered it to myself over and over, like a spell. Because in a world that wanted me erased, I needed to remind myself I was still here, still worthy, still whole. A few days later, I met someone at the shelter. Her name was Marla. Late 20s, sharp wit, eyes that had clearly seen too much. She offered me a granola bar and said, "You're new." I nodded. "Been there," she added, and patted the spot beside her. We talked, not about the usual things, jobs, weather, small talk, but about why. Why we were here, why our families had turned away, why the world made it so hard to just be. She told me about her mom, a woman who believed being queer was a phase caused by college liberalism. She hadn't spoken to her in 3 years. "I miss her," Marla said. "But I miss me more when I try to make her love me." That hit hard, because I knew exactly what she meant. We ended up talking late into the night, sharing stories, swapping music, really laughing for the first time in what felt like forever. That's when it clicked. These weren't just strangers, they were survivors. People like me, people who'd been pushed out and kept walking anyway. People who carried truth like a torch in a dark tunnel, burning not to destroy but to light the way. They weren't broken, they weren't lost, they were home in ways I'd never seen before. And slowly, I realized I could be too. The first time I called something home again, it wasn't a place, it was a moment. It happened at a community center on the edge of the city. Nico had told me about it. A weekly drop-in night for LGBTQ+ youth. Free food, warm lights, no questions, just people. People who understood. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't ready. I felt like I didn't belong, not anywhere really. I wasn't out enough, or strong enough, or healed enough. I was just drifting. But one night, I went. The building was small, tucked between a dry cleaner and a bookstore. The sign on the door was hand-painted, and inside, the scent of cinnamon and rice lingered in the air. Someone had brought a crock-pot meal. Christmas lights hung from the ceiling, even though it was May. People sat in circles on old couches, laughing, arguing about movies, making friendship bracelets. I hovered in the doorway until someone waved me over. Her name was Jada. She had purple hair and this lopsided grin that made me feel less like a stranger and more like a guest. "You knew?" she asked. I nodded. "Cool. We don't do small talk here. What's your favorite kind of heartbreak music?" It was such a strange, unexpected question that I laughed. And just like that, I was in. That night, I shared my story. Not all of it, just a slice. A boy, a home, a silence that turned into exile. And people nodded. Not out of politeness, but recognition. Someone passed me a tissue without making it weird. Someone else offered a story of their own, worse in some ways, kinder in others. And suddenly, my pain didn't feel like a wound anymore. It felt like a thread woven into something larger. A fabric of survival. Afterward, I stayed late to help clean up. I was drying dishes when Jada said, "You coming back next week?" I hadn't thought that far ahead. I barely thought past the next day back then. But I nodded. "Yeah, I think I will." That week, I wrote a list in my journal. What feels like home now? The smell of rice and cinnamon, laughter that doesn't ask who you love, old couches and warm lights, people who see you and stay. Each item felt like a tiny nail, pinning me back into the world. It wasn't all perfect, of course. Healing never is. There were still days I woke up dizzy with doubt, still moments when a passing stranger's glare made me shrink. I still flinched when someone raised their voice, still scrolled past old photos of my family, wondering if they missed me, wondering if they even noticed I was gone. But I wasn't alone anymore. I started volunteering at the center, running writing workshops, organizing donated clothes, listening. That part became my favorite, listening, because every person who came through those doors had a story, and each one was a reminder that pain doesn't mean broken, that survival is sacred, that we all carry our scars differently, but sometimes we can hold each other's pain for a while, just long enough to lighten the load. One night, Marla handed me a letter. "I wrote this for my mom," she said, "but I'm never gonna send it. I just needed to get it out." I read it. It was raw, beautiful, wounded, and it made me think of a letter I'd been holding inside. To my own mother. That night, I went back to the shelter and opened my journal, turned to a fresh page, picked up my pen, and I wrote, not because I needed her to read it, but because I needed to. It started like this. "Dear Mum, you always told me to be brave. You just didn't expect I'd need to be brave against you." The words poured out like floodwater. Years of quiet pain, unsaid thoughts, fractured love. I didn't hold back. I didn't polish it. I just let it spill. By the time I finished, my hand was cramping and my eyes were swollen. But my chest, it felt lighter. I didn't rip the letter up. I didn't burn it. I folded it gently and tucked it into the back of my journal. A reminder, a release. I never sent it, but in writing it, I found something I didn't know I'd lost, my voice. That voice started to grow louder in poems, in conversations, in the way I held my head when I walked into a room. I began introducing myself not with shame, but with truth. I'm queer. I'm healing. I'm here. And if people walked away after that, so be it. Because the ones who stayed, they were the ones I was building my life around now. The kind who didn't ask me to shrink, who didn't love me in spite of who I was, but because of it. That's when I understood something I'd never been taught at home. You don't have to earn love by erasing yourself. Real love recognizes you. And I was finally learning how to recognize myself. It took time, months, really, but eventually, I began to stop surviving and start living. Not all at once. Not like flipping a switch, more like thawing. Like waking up slowly from a dream where I was always wrong, always too much, or never enough. And the shift started with people. The kind who saw me not as a problem to fix, but a person to know. There was Cam, a barista at the cafe near the shelter, who wore nail polish and had a laugh like sunlight. One morning he wrote, "You matter," on my coffee cup. No explanation, no comment. Just 3 small words that lingered with me all day. There was Lena, a youth counselor at the drop-in center, who taught me how to breathe through panic, how to name my needs, how to ask for help without apologizing for existing. And there was a moment small but seismic when I realized I had stopped bracing for impact in every room I entered. That was new. I remember walking down a street in early autumn, the air crisp, golden leaves crackling underfoot, headphones in, hoodie zipped up tight. For once, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I wasn't checking reflections in store windows to see if someone was staring. I was just there, alive, breathing, free. And it hit me, I didn't want my old life back. Not really. I missed my family. That much was true, but not the way they made me feel. Not the shrinking, the explaining, the walking on eggshells. I missed the idea of family, not the reality I had known. What I was starting to build now, with people who stayed late to talk, who celebrated tiny wins with big cheers, who offered hugs without asking why I needed one. That was something better. That was family. Chosen family. I learned that phrase from a zine someone left at the shelter. It said, "Chosen family isn't a substitute, it's a reclamation." And that stuck with me. Because for so long, I'd thought family was something you were born into. Blood and duty. A locked door. But maybe family is who shows up when you're at your lowest. Who keeps showing up. Who doesn't flinch when you tell the truth. Who says, "You're not too much," and means it. I started seeing it everywhere. In the way Nico left notes on my pillow. "Drink water. You're loved." In the way Jada looped her arm through mine at Pride, grinning like we were walking a red carpet. In the way Marla, hardened and sharp-edged, gave me her last bus token without a second thought. These weren't just kindnesses, they were declarations. You belong. And slowly, I started to believe it. I began to laugh more. Real, open laughs that shook my shoulders. I sang along to songs in public. I made dumb puns in group chats. I cried when I needed to and didn't apologize for it. It wasn't a transformation. It was a return to the version of me I'd buried to survive. There's a photo on my phone now taken by Lena during one of our writing nights at the center. I'm sitting on a couch, holding a mug, barefoot, hair a mess. I'm smiling, not for anyone, not because I'm supposed to, just smiling. When I look at that photo, I don't see trauma, I see proof. Proof that I didn't vanish, that the silence didn't win, that even after being pushed out, erased, and rejected, I came back. Stronger, softer, whole. One night, Cam asked me, "If you could go back and undo it all come out differently, stay in your house, keep your family close, would you?" I thought about it, really thought. And then I said, "Number." Because I wouldn't trade this version of me, the one who tells the truth, the one who stands tall, the one who doesn't settle for half love or hollow approval. I don't hate my family, I don't wish them pain, but I no longer wait for their permission to be who I am. And maybe one day, they'll come around. Maybe they won't, but either way, I'm building a life that isn't waiting for their yes. The letter stayed folded in my journal for weeks. I carried it with me through cold mornings and crowded buses, through evenings at the drop-in center and nights at the shelter. I never read it again. I didn't need to. I knew every word. It wasn't written for her anymore. It was written for me. But one rainy Sunday, while I was cleaning out my backpack, it slipped loose and fluttered to the floor. I picked it up and sat on the bed, unfolding it with slow fingers. My handwriting stared back at me, raw and unfiltered. "Dear Mom, you always told me to be brave. You just didn't expect I'd need to be brave against you?" I whispered the sentence out loud, and for the first time, I didn't cry. There was something empowering about holding my truth in my hands. It wasn't rage anymore. It wasn't even grief. It was clarity. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to prove them wrong. What I needed, what I wanted was peace. And maybe that's what this letter had always been. A bridge I never intended to cross, but needed to know I could build. That day, I made a choice. I walked to the library, logged into a computer, and opened a blank document. And I started writing again this time, not a letter, but a story. My story. I wrote about the night I left home, the couch surfing, the shelter, the people who saw me, the community I found. I wrote about cinnamon rice, rainbow flags taped to windows, laughter over takeout, and a barista who scribbled hope onto a coffee cup. I wrote about surviving, and slowly, so slowly, I almost didn't notice I started writing about healing. It wasn't polished, it wasn't meant for publication, but it was real. Every word felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been stolen in the silence. I printed a copy and put it in my journal, tucked next to the letter. Two versions of the same truth zone aching, one whole. That night, I went to the drop-in center like usual. It was quiet, rain tapped gently on the windows. We sat in a circle, passing around mugs of tea, and someone asked, "What's something you've let go of lately?" I hesitated. Then I said, "Anger." Heads nodded. No questions, no judgment, just space. After group, Marla caught up with me in the hallway. "You look lighter," she said. "Yeah," I replied. "I think I am." She smiled. Letting go's hard, but holding on too long is harder. That stuck with me. I went home back to the shelter, and before I climbed into bed, I took out the letter again. And I burned it. Not out of spite, not because I wanted to forget, but because I was done carrying it. I watched the flame curl the edges, turn the ink to ash. I whispered, "I forgive you. I forgive me." And when the flame went out, I felt something strange. Not sadness, not triumph, just quiet. The kind that comes when a chapter ends. The next morning, I woke up early. I walked through the park, leaves crunching under my shoes, the sky just starting to blush with sunrise. And I realized something. I hadn't thought about them all day. Not because I didn't care anymore, but because I was finally too full of my own life to stay stuck in theirs. That afternoon, I helped hang art at the center paintings by queer youth, bold and messy and beautiful. I watched a new kid walk in, eyes wide, backpack clutched tight. I smiled at them, the same way Jada had once smiled at me. And I thought, this is what family feels like. People showing up, people staying, people making room for each other's truth. Later, I pulled Nico aside and said, "Thank you." "For what?" he asked. "For reminding me I exist," I said. He didn't make a joke. He just hugged me, tight, solid, real. And in that moment, I knew I was no longer just surviving. I was building something strong, something mine. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon. I almost didn't pick up. I was sorting clothes at the shelter's donation room, shirts into one pile, jackets into another. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out absent-mindedly, expecting Nico or maybe the drop-in coordinator, but the name on the screen stopped me cold. Mum. It didn't say Mum Mobile or Home Just Mum, the way I'd saved it years ago, before I'd even realized what everything was. My hand froze over the denim pile. My thumb hovered over the screen. 1,000 things passed through me in that moment: fear, anger, curiosity, grief. The urge to hang up before it even rang through. But I answered. I held the phone to my ear and said softly, "Hello?" There was a pause. Then her voice. "Hi." That's all. A single syllable, like we were picking up after a normal day. I said nothing. I wasn't going to make it easier. She cleared her throat. "I just wanted to check in, see where you are, if you're okay." I almost laughed. Weeks of silence, a voicemail that cut me out of the family like I was a tumor. And now this? "I'm fine," I said. Another pause. "That's good," she replied. "That's really good." I could hear the hum of the fridge in the background, maybe dishes in the sink. The house I used to live in, the house that used to be mine. "I've been thinking," she continued. "We don't have to talk about everything, not right now. Maybe you could come over for dinner sometime. Your sister asks about you." My heart twisted. Did she really? Or was that just bait? "I don't think that's a good idea," I said, my voice steady but kind. Mom sighed. "You're still angry." "No," I replied. "I'm healing." She went quiet again. Then, "So, what do you want me to say?" I took a breath. "I want you to say you see me. I want you to say you love all of me, not just the parts that fit your expectations. I want you to say I'm still your child, and that won't change because of who I love." Silence. Then she said, "I don't know if I can do that. Not yet." And there it was. The line, the boundary. Honest, brutal, real. I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "Then we're not ready," I said. There was a tightness in my chest, but no tears, no shaking. I felt grounded, rooted. She whispered, "Okay." And then, "I do love you." I held on to that. Even though it wasn't enough, it was something, and it was said out loud. "I love you too," I told her. We sat in that stillness for a few seconds longer, neither knowing how to end it. Then I said, "Goodbye, Mum." Click. The line went dead. I stared at the phone in my hand. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel shattered. I felt clear. This was who she was right now, and this was who I was. We were no longer trying to fit each other into boxes we'd outgrown. That night, I told Jada and Marla about the call. They listened without interrupting, just letting me talk it all out. She didn't apologize. I said. No, Jada replied, but you didn't apologize either. That meant something. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not waiting for her to change. Not waiting for them to come around. Not waiting for their version of love to finally make space for me. I'd already built something better, and no one could take that from me. That weekend, I went to the park where I used to walk as a kid. It looked smaller now, the trees more weathered. I sat on a bench near the pond and pulled out my journal. I didn't write a letter this time. I wrote a vow. I will not shrink again. I will not silence myself for belonging. I will not trade my truth for a seat at any table that asks me to lie. And then I wrote, I am enough. I am whole. I am home. Somewhere along the way, the word home stopped feeling like a place I lost and started feeling like something I could make. Piece by piece, day by day. It began with a room, just a small studio I rented with help from a transitional housing grant. One window, a creaky radiator, a fold-out bed that doubled as a couch. When I first got the keys, I stood in the doorway for a long time, not moving. No one else was there. No welcoming committee. No applause. Just me. And yet, it felt like a ceremony. Like crossing a finish line I hadn't known I was running toward. I remember setting my things down gently, like I was afraid the walls would disappear if I moved too fast. I unpacked slowly. Books stacked on a crate-turned shelf, thrift store dishes in the cabinet. My old high school t-shirt folded into the bottom drawer. And then I lit a candle. Lavender, calm, warm. For the first time in forever, I slept in a space that was mine. Not borrowed, not temporary, not conditional. Mine. The next morning, sunlight came in through the window and painted gold across the bare floor. I sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in a blanket, coffee in hand, and whispered, I made it. Not because the journey was over, but because I had survived what was supposed to break me. I got a part-time job at a local bookstores mall, independent, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and handwritten staff pics. My boss, Ray, wore suspenders and always smelled like peppermint tea. They didn't ask about my past, just handed me an apron and said, be kind. Alphabetize the memoirs. You'll be fine. And I was. More than fine. I started rebuilding a life not the one my parents had imagined, but one stitched from truth and chosen moments. I hosted movie nights with friends from the center, everyone squeezed onto the floor with popcorn bowls in our laps. We watched everything from old queer classics to campy horror films. We laughed loud. We cried without shame. We paused every scene to yell at characters who couldn't just say what they meant. I started dating, cautiously, tenderly. There was someone, Jamie. Kind eyes, steady hands. They asked questions without assuming the answers, waited patiently when I flinched, and told me I didn't have to be better to be worthy of love. One night, we sat on my fire escape, eating takeout under a sky full of stars barely visible through city haze. I told them everything. Not all at once, but enough. And they didn't try to fix it. They just said, thank you for telling me. That mattered. That mattered more than any apology I'd never received. At the drop-in center, I started mentoring, not formally, just showing up, listening, being there for the kids who came in wide-eyed and scared, like I once had. One of them, River, 14, all elbows and bravado, asked me one day, does it get better? I didn't give them a speech. I just said, yes. Not because the world changes fast, but because you do. And they nodded. They understood. I think that's when I knew I'd crossed over from surviving to becoming. Not just who I was before, but someone more whole, more certain, more real. My parents still haven't fully come around. We talk now, sometimes. Polite, careful. They ask about work. I ask about the weather. There's a surface piece, like glass over a still lake. But I no longer ache for their approval, because I am no longer a version of myself they created. I am me, fully, unapologetically, and I am loved. by people who chose me, by a community I helped build, by the quiet parts of myself I finally stopped hiding. Home isn't walls or rooms or last names. It's this: a journal full of truths, a lavender candle, a fire escape kiss, a voice that no longer trembles, a life that fits. And as I sit here now, lights low, story told, I hope wherever you are that you know this too. You deserve to be seen. You deserve a life that doesn't ask you to vanish. You deserve a home that knows your name and speaks it with love.